what's next for Egypt. Let's chat to Jeenah, Executive Director at the Afro-Middle East Centre. Always a huge pleasure to have you with us. I'm going to go straight to the chase. Is Egypt on the verge of a civil war?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that there's a civil war looming. I think, however, that the violence that we saw yesterday from the side of the army overwhelmingly, but also some of the violence that resulted from that, the burning of churches, etc. I think some of that violence is going to continue over the next few weeks at least, but not a civil war, no.
The Muslim Brotherhood seems rather relentless in their pursuit. They want Mohammed Morsi back, and they don't seem willing to compromise at this stage. What's the solution?
Well, that of course is their public position, and with negotiations there's always a public position and a real position. We now know, after yesterday's announcement by some of the EU people that were involved in attempting to mediate between the sides, that in fact a week or so ago, when Catherine Ashton was there and the Americans were there and the Qataris and the UAE, etc., that the mediators came up with a deal which the Muslim Brotherhood accepted, but the army rejected. It was a roadmap for elections, for a new constitution, etc., which didn't include the restoration of Morsi as president. In fact, it spoke about a quote-unquote safe exit for Morsi out of the country. The Brotherhood accepted that, and they were willing to go along with that. The army said no, and well, we now know what their plans really were.
As we stand, the US, which has refused to call the ousting of Mr. Morsi a coup, has spoken out against the violence yesterday. We know that they've also cancelled a military training trip there and sending equipment that's now been put on ice. But what do you make of their handling of the unrest by the US?
By the US. See, for the US, I mean, the reason that they didn't call it a coup is, of course, that they have this special relationship with the Egyptian army. So Egypt gets $1.5 billion annual aid from the US. 1.3 billion of that goes directly to the army. Actually, it doesn't go directly to the army. About 80% of that stays in the US because it goes to American weapons companies. So two things about that. If they call it a coup, they have to stop the aid, which means that 80% of that bailout for American weapons companies doesn't happen. But also that the aid is a reward to the Egyptian army for the Camp David Accord. So if they remove that, that makes the neighborhood much more dangerous for Israel, which the US doesn't want. So as much as they might be upset with the military, there's very little chance that they're going to say it's a coup and stop the aid. They might use threats like they have now with the cancelling of the exercise, military exercise, etc. But I doubt they're going to go that far. But yesterday, I think that I think Kerry's reference to violence made it sound as if there's violence from both sides, which wasn't really true. But for the first time, his unhappiness was articulated with the military. And I think to a large extent it had to do with the fact that they did have a plan last week. They had a plan to get out of this crisis, out of the stalemate, which has been there now for a few weeks, and the military just wasn't interested.
As briefly as possible, bringing it back home now, what does the unrest in Egypt have to do with South Africa? Or at least a better question to ask is, how will it affect South Africa, and how can the continent respond to this?
Well, it won't affect South Africa directly, but it does affect the continent, and it does put the AU in the position where the AU has to take some position now. The AU was very good in taking a position immediately after the coup, saying it's a coup, suspending Egypt. But what has happened now, really, in terms of the kind of culture that South Africa, Nigeria, and the African Union in general are trying to create on the continent, it in a sense takes the situation of the continent back. And Egypt, of course, is a big power. Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa together contribute something like 30% of the budget of the AU. So suspending Egypt was a big thing, but now the AU and South Africa have to take an even stronger position, call for UN action, etc.
We'll have to leave it there for now as the tension prevails in Egypt. Thanks for your time.
News that moves. eNCA.com.